great to see everybody's faces in the little window here and get the opportunity to talk to you all tonight. Since we are doing this and we're probably all becoming web meeting pros at this point, I just wanted a few reminders that if you have any trouble with your sound or anything during the call, these are some things that might help. We are going to record this meeting. It's also being broadcast on Facebook Live right now, but we'll post the recording on the website so people can comment after. So before we get started, I'd just like to have everybody keep yourself muted for the first few minutes, and then we will switch over and start the discussion portion of the meeting. And at that point, if you can just keep yourself muted unless you're actively talking with the group, that'll be helpful. And if you have any comments or questions during the presentation portion, if you can submit those through the chat function, Brian's going to help us sort through those and kind of set us up for the discussion portion of the meeting. And if we have any topics that we don't, that'll help us carry over to any follow-up meetings we need. So before I get started, are there any questions from the members in attendance? All right.
So anytime, Emily, I'm sorry, anytime you want us to offer feedback, you want us to type it in the chat?
Yeah, for now, if you can do that, and then maybe later, just depending on how things go, we'll see. But the more you can submit it in writing, the easier it'll be for us to track it and make sure we get everything covered. So that would be very helpful. All right, I'm going to start recording now and get us started. All right, well, welcome everybody. It is time to review the first draft of the Becoming Deerfield Comprehensive Plan. This has been a long time coming, and I appreciate you all being here tonight because it has been since August of 2020 since any of us saw each other face to face, and we had a big gap between the last time we met, and I believe it was in February, and then that August meeting. So things have taken us a while to get here. We did send the draft plan out in November of 2020. So hopefully you've had at least some time to look over that draft. But what I wanted to do tonight was give you an overview of kind of where we are in this process, because it has been kind of extended because of COVID, and then give you a executive summary overview of the content of the plan. And then what we would like to do is spend the bulk of this evening to address or discuss any of the critical questions or topics that you saw in this draft that you think either we need to expand on or perhaps change the tone a little bit, or if there are some things that you feel like we need to make a better connection between elements. That's what we'd like to do with this evening. Is to really try to hone in on the elements of the plan that you maybe just aren't clear on or want to discuss further with the group. Because again, this is a draft, and at this point, staff has reviewed it, and I know we have some comments back from Warren County, so that will help us also. But you all put a lot into this, so we want to make sure that it represents what you feel is the future for Deerfield. So to kind of help put things in perspective, you'll remember back when we started this process, we started with the public input and finding out what was important to the citizens of Deerfield was the first thing that we did with that survey. We circulated a virtual survey and then had some publicity efforts. I think a lot of you went door to door and asked your neighbors to participate in that. And that came back and gave us great results. We had a live workshop where people came in and talked about what areas they wanted to see addressed in this plan. So we did all of that public input up front to make sure we were understanding what was important in Deerfield. Then we put together what we called the plan framework, and that included the goal statements, some objectives, so the things this planning process. And we started to discuss some implementation recommendations. How would we go about doing that? But I think as we did that, a lot of the steering committee felt like we needed to focus more on what was happening with the land use before we could really finalize that piece. And so we kind of took a break from the big picture agenda and framework components and on the land use. And we did a series, I think we ended up doing 5 focus meetings, or it was at least 3 or 4. And we spent a lot of time as a group really, digging into that land use and assessing the 2014 plan and what you all felt like needed to be more detailed in this plan. And so you'll see in this draft, all of that work has been incorporated into this draft. And so right now where we are is at that draft plan phase. We've got all the plan elements put together. You'll see the maps and the graphics in here. We've referenced the other studies like the housing needs study that we did. And we have everything from the goals and the objectives down to those implementation recommendations. What are those steps that the township can take to achieve these goals? So from tonight, what we hope to be able to do is, if we need a few meetings with the steering committee to do this, that's fine. But our next step is to review, revise, prepare the plan document for public review. And so to do that, we're going to reformat it, make it a lot more user friendly, and just put together a really nice document that'll work online and in print. Then we'll do a public review round. And so that document will be out there on the website. People can look at it, and then we'll do an open house or some kind of virtual presentation so that people can ask questions and get their input in the final draft. And then we'll bring it back to the trustees and the zoning commission for their adoption process, which, since your trustees have all been involved at this point, hopefully there will be no surprises in there, and that adoption process will go relatively smoothly. So the plan itself is in 4 parts. We've assembled an executive summary that talks about the planning background and the key findings. And then the true parts of the plan itself, those future recommendations, include the community agenda, which is the goals and strategies. We have part 2, which is the land management plan. So that's where all those land use elements, we talk about the transportation, the parks and recreation, all of those pieces fall into that land management section. Final section is part 3, which is the implementation strategy, and that's basically the work plan that rolls you up into the next steps after the plan is adopted. So the community agenda is basically laying out the framework for the comprehensive plan. And again, these are taken directly from what the community said was important. And so what are those long-term goals, and what kind of objectives do we need to establish to reach those goals? We ended up, I think, with 7 primary community goal topics. Some of these were carried forward from the previous plans, and some of them were new or took different prominence in this plan. So we have a growth management goal. We have a pedestrian and trail connections. We actually have two goals because those were split with the completion of the recent Park and Recreation Master Plan. Township identity was a carryover from the previous plan. And so that is still very important. The need for intergovernmental coordination remains important because of the way the township functions with your regional partners. Redevelopment was something that was in the previous plan, but in this one really took a higher role in coming out as its own theme or goal topic. We also had quite a bit of discussion about housing quality and diversity. And then finally, transportation, which again, the township has some limited influence over, but you have some really important transportation projects in the township, and it's important to include those here. So the community agenda, this first part of the plan, really sets out these guiding policies for the rest of the recommendations. In part two, that's where we start showing the maps and the specific recommendations to achieve those goals. So we have a land management plan, and that includes the character areas, which are carryover from the previous planning efforts. We have updated some of those areas based on that work that we did throughout the latter half of 2019 and the early part of 2020. We have land use planning, which in the previous document, we did not highlight individual land uses for parcels. It was just guided by the character areas. But in this case, we looked at it, several focus areas that were important enough. They had enough potential for change that the township and the steering committee felt they needed more guidance on those. So we now have focus area land use plans. We addressed the recreation with carryover of most of the goals and strategies from the recently adopted master plan. We continued the section on natural resources and their protection, and then the mobility and connectivity priorities for the township. So the character areas, this is the updated map, and we present this in its own section of the land management portion of the plan. But we have low density rural neighborhoods, medium density rural neighborhoods, neighborhood mixed use, office parks, regional highway commercial, and town center mixed use. And those still carry forward a lot of the same recommendations that they had previously. To support that, we worked on those future land use recommendations for those target focus areas. And so we have a list of future land use categories, which I believe we've modified them some, but they were included in previous plans. They just were never mapped. But now we have them mapped for these areas of critical change. And then we did subdivide the township into these areas that we called planning focus areas because they were kind of grouped by characteristics or the nature of the change that we were expecting. And so this, for all of you who did participate in all of those work sessions with the workbook, this all should look very familiar to you. Because we spent so much time on those details, we did carry forward the detailed focus area plans. So you can see the very high level details of each of these areas for those parcels that we evaluated as having high potential for change in the future. Again, the Parks and Recreation carries forward a lot, almost all of the recommendations of the master plan. When the 2014 plan was drafted, that was a recommendation. And so now you actually have a more substantive set of recommendations for Parks and Recreation in the township, which is a great success. And that is an asset of this planning process, is that the township has a history of following through with their plans. And so this is carrying forward, and it's much more concrete than the previous version. Natural resources is included in the plan again. A lot of this was direct carryover from the previous planning processes, because your natural resources were, in the same places then, and they're still important to protect now. And so these continue to be a important part of the land management in the township. We updated the mobility and connectivity. We have a master plan of paths that is provided from the regional county-wide planning process, as well as the recommendations that were made in this effort and previous planning efforts. So that was carried forward to make sure that this was something that we were addressing. Again, this was something that was important. People wanting to be able to connect from their neighborhood to some of the services and facilities located in the township in a safe way. And then finally, part 3 of the plan is the implementation strategy. And I always say to my steering committees and communities, to me, this is the most important part of the plan. And we certainly want to hear from all of you if these are the right implementation steps to be taking. But we did consider very strongly what the goals stated, and then what are those actions that we kind of agreed to in this process could work for Deerfield Township. And so what we have done is, I don't have all of the implementation recommendations in the presentation tonight, but you'll find those in your document. But we have 4 types of work plan tasks. We have those that are ongoing. So those are things that are probably already underway and go on, it's not something you just do once. So that's like an administrative task or a program that you might already have in place. We have short term. So these are things that should be started as soon as possible, and often need to be started before some of the midterm or long-term strategies can be executed. We have midterm things that are, that 2 to 5 year range. So they're important, but either we need to do something else to prepare for them, or they just don't have as much urgency to them as the short-term efforts really do. And then the long-term things are medium to low priority. These are things that we would like to be able to do, but they could change based on planning context or demographics, and they should be revisited in 5 years to see if they're still relevant. And they're very important, but just not as high priority as some of the other things that we'll look at here. We also categorize the implementation actions by what kind of action you will need to take. So we have things that are administrative or organizational. Sometimes those require very little money. They just require a conscious effort on the organization's part to make sure that those are implemented. We have the regulatory guidelines. So your zoning resolution is the key regulation that you have to help implement the plan. And we have 3 specific things that we are recommending in the land use recommendations that could be addressed in zoning updates. And I think this first one was review and revise the conservation and park residential standards. That was underway during the process. The new recommendation for a low density rural residential district is something to consider. And then the use of PUD or the business redevelopment district processes to manage development and redevelopment in some critical areas. And then we also talked about establishing a highway overlay district to eliminate the need for variance requests on highway properties. The next section is plans, studies, and strategies. And those are things that would be follow-up or subsequent planning efforts. And so, you know, completing an economic development strategy is something that was discussed as being important. Redevelopment plans, including identifying financing and development partners for targeted sites. So actually activating redevelopment opportunities. And then collaborate on preparations of adequate public facilities manual. And that's one that, you know, it may be a, you know, more of a collaboration other agencies to make sure that you all understand how things are working together. For instance, school enrollment and housing development. Initiatives and programs. So I think those are fairly straightforward. These are actual activities or programs that either the township or a partner agency could invest in. So we want to continue using the efforts of the Community Investment Corporation to promote redevelopment and reinvestment. Consider adding an arts and culture function to the Parks and Recreation staff and events. Partnership collaborations, again, continuing in county, especially the sheriff's office and providing safety services. Increased partnerships and communications between township officials and local school boards, working with various extra jurisdictional service providers, and continue coordination with the regional park and recreation organizations. And then the final group of implementation actions is the capital improvements. So these are the things where you put real dollars into real property, and this includes acquiring and building park facilities as the master plan lays out, design and build a new township administration building, continue strategic efforts to increase trails and the connectivity and protecting open spaces, continue implementing and installing Deerfield Township branded street signs, and develop and implement a Deerfield Township wayfinding program to enhance identity and mobility. So again, this to me and for you all tonight, these are the actions that I would love to get your feedback on, but I certainly understand that you may have questions, thoughts, and comments on the other aspects of this. But I feel like in all of our meetings, although they've been a while, we've spent a lot of time on the other parts of this plan. And this is the piece that's really going to be fresh and new and need your consideration. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any general questions, and then we can get started. If you have any specific areas of the plan that you want to discuss with the group, we can get into that.
You must have nailed it, Emily.
Sounds like it.
Do you want questions or comments from us now, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, I guess you can hear me because you responded. That's good. Yeah, so yeah, I felt like the first two sections were really well done. I was seemed to capture. Can't believe how long it's been since we had all those discussions, but it really seemed to bring back everything we had talked about. And I was even checking little details on some of the various little sections outlined throughout the township. So I thought that those two sections are in really good shape.
Good.
And then, but then I had a question about, so I guess you're saying what's in the draft now for the implementation plan, that is complete? Because to me, it seemed like I got to that part and I was like, well, almost like I was missing a page or something. But
Well, I think they are the first draft. That's this group has not talked about those. I provided in this draft. It's the only new information that you haven't seen. So I'm definitely open to recommendations or things that you feel like need to be in there but are not.
okay. Of course, it was also the last thing that I read. I was getting tired after reading the whole thing, but okay. So it is, this is the draft, and then we should comment on it. I guess the other thing, this is kind of a comment or question. I noticed a lot of the figures or maps that were in the, I guess the second section, a lot of them were pulled from the 2015 plan.
Mhm.
Sure, and it looked like a lot of things were kind of out of date, like some of the bike trails or other things that I noticed. Seem like
Yes.
they're way out of date. Are those going to be updated for the final copy, or?
Yeah, so there's some flexibility to do that. Part of this was us trying to assemble all of the information into a draft so that you all could see it all together. And so if there are things on those maps, because we didn't spend the time on some of those other things that we did with the land use, if there are things that you're noting on those maps, we can update those maps. They just haven't been updated yet.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if you were going to have the capability to do that since they came from a previous plan or not, but that'd be good.
Yeah, we have both the township did those maps that time, and our firm did the plan document the last time, so we have access to everything.
Hey, Emily, it's Lel. If you don't mind, I'll jump in.
Sure.
I wanted to check in on page 13 of the draft. We are talking about Deerfield's population and growth. Now that we 21, I'm wondering if we can get an updated or just to make sure that the numbers we're working with are accurate in regards to the addition of 315 people every year and the number of households. I think we've exceeded that number last year alone. And so I'm not sure that's a great starting point for talking about growth at this point in the game with the district coming online and a couple other communities coming online. So I wanted to just check on that in regards to our growth.
Okay, so I will say a couple things about growth and comp planning, which is somewhat challenging. Is that is always a moving number, and so I would not expect to see the 2020 census data until at the earliest April this year. And while we can do that update, I don't know I'm not sure what the overall value is to the planning process by updating it at this point, except for what might work is to do a minor addendum or something in the introduction to this section that says, you know, this is where numbers were. But since we probably will be straddling the 2020 release, I don't know if that would have a great deal of value to the process.
It just seems like a huge gap between 2010 and the population increase and 10 years down the road. Is that really the best we have to work with? And I just feel like the new households annually is pretty low. I mean, it can come and go, but it seems low. So I don't know if that needs to be broken out into residential units, maybe. I'm not sure. It just seemed a little behind. Am I off on the?
You're specifically talking about, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Is it this statement here that,
Down a little further, it just says since 2010, the township's population has increased about 315 people every year, or about 140, 130 new households annually. I'm just thinking that that number is higher with the residential units we have going on in some of our mixed use developments. So
okay.
I'm
Okay,
not
because
sure.
I think that was based on I think we did that with the 2018, 2019 numbers, based on the actual permits that had been issued. So if we want to update that with the last year, I think we could do that.
Yeah, I'm following what you're saying. We can work to look into that. Makes sense.
I mean, I think it's especially because we're not looking at just single family houses here. We're also looking at the apartments and everything that we have had come online, which are more than like 2 to 3 people per unit.
Okay, so that's another thing then, is the shift in household sizes. Okay. Yeah, and again, I think, the permit numbers, I think we'll be able to,
going to be, do we
Mhm.
keep that there, or does that, I mean, I can't remember if we decided if we're keeping that or changing that color on the
So-
map.
yeah, so here's the other challenge with all of this is this was existing land use. We did this analysis at the very beginning of the process. And it's not something that we can keep live and update constantly throughout because it changes the numbers. But because we know that's already planned, we know what's going to be there, or it may already be there at this point. This is just a snapshot in time. And so that will be something that we can make sure is on the maps, is what was the date of the information that was used to do these maps, because otherwise, especially when you do static maps, we would just be in a constant process of updating the existing land use. So this is what was used for the analysis purpose, so we could do the planning. But the township can keep a live inventory of what's there.
Well, Emily, I'll just keep talking.
Okay.
Can you jump to page 35, please? So on the overview, I had this question. I was discussing it with Mr. Reiners earlier today. We have growth management, pedestrian and trail connections, and so forth. Now, when I was just a humble, resident, and I would come before the former board of trustees, I would always say, look, your number one priority is growth management, and your number two is this, and your number three is this. And I don't think this is how we've prioritized them with a number system for priorities. So if that is the case, and two isn't the most important priority, I would suggest that we make those bullet points instead of numbering them, or reconfigure and talk with this group what the priority points should be in what order. Because growth management's definitely a holdover from the previous plan as our number one priority, but I'm not so sure that pedestrian and trail connections would be number two. I'm just not sure. And I could open that up to the group, or if you think a quick fix is bullet points instead of numbering, I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, so that is something I'm trying to recall if when the first time around that we tried to address these elements, I think I wanted to do a prioritization exercise with you all, but we got a little set back by I guess the density of everything that we had on that meeting's agenda. So my preference would be that we do prioritize these, and then that carries over then to the implementation priorities as well. So that's something, I mean, I don't know that we're prepared to do that right in this very moment, but certainly let's discuss it. And then maybe we can send around just a quick thing for you all to like fill out and say, you know, these would be my top, like put them in the order that you think they should be in. And then we can kind of reconcile it with the nominative group process.
Hey, Emily, do we have an order from like based off the surveys that we did to the public? I feel like we kind of already asked them, like the public, what their priorities were. And we might have like some information to at least springboard from about what the community feels is a priority, that we're not all starting from square one here.
Yeah, yes, you are correct. And probably
I was looking at one of these figures on, sorry to interrupt, but I was looking at these, what do you call these little diagrams you had in the first couple pages? It kind of showed what the community's feedback was in terms of, you have the size of these different words.
Word cloud?
Yeah, the word clouds.
Yeah. I mean, is there data behind? I mean, there must be some kind of data behind those.
Yeah, we've got all that. So we can certainly dig back into that. And I know we had a report and we even included it in a presentation to you all about this. Yeah, so it's, you know, we did the what do you love, biggest opportunities, and I think the challenges to address. So traffic and development obviously were two things that people were very concerned about challenge-wise. So I think, again, this is probably, because of the time that has elapsed, I would probably need to go back and look at those initial public input components. Actually, might have that PowerPoint open here. So so we did do the evaluation of the existing goals from the 2015 plan, and adequate parks and recreation facilities were the top public responses. Looks like this was probably from the workshop. Strong interjurisdictional partnerships, coordination with transportation organizations, the connected trail network, then compatible redevelopment, growth management, and then strong identity and diverse housing.
You know, one thing, when I look at these goals and objectives, you know, one thing that stands out at me, and after looking at those today, I think those 8 are goals and objectives that are all of significant importance. And, you know, in my opinion, I think it's very tough to delineate or to try to say, you know, there's a number 1 or a number 8, because each of those goals and objectives will come into play in varying degrees with different developments and different scenarios. So I think all hold, you know, equal weight, but will be applied differently depending on the case at hand. My personal opinion, you know, I'm more of an advocate of seeing them bullet pointed versus prioritized 1 through 8, because I think they all have significant importance. It's just a matter of where they play in. And these are the goals and objectives, and they get broken out in detail as you get into the further sections. But my 2 cents.
I
Any
agree with
commu-
Eric. I think that, you know, you can even put in that, on that line right before that, the goals and objectives are organized to include the following categories, and then bullet point each one. And then that way it says that these are all important. They're all included in the plan. And these are things that, you know, we're going to break down further as you read through the plan.
Would you state that again so that I can capture?
Yeah, I just said, so like I said, that sentence right above, you say, you know, the goals and objectives are organized to include the following categories, and then you can bulletproof each one. So, and then that way it just says it includes each one of these as important objectives and goals that we're going to focus on.
Okay. Other committee members, how do you feel about that proposed change? Go with the bullets.
Yeah, I like the bullets, and then you could add a phrase about, you know, these are the collective priorities or something to that effect. It's not just that they are the ones that we consider, but these were the kind of the top 8 or whatever that were considered.
Okay. Anything else about the introduction to the community agenda and then the goal categories? Okay. Does anyone have any other, you know, questions or concerns about the goals and the objectives? Okay. And again, we did spend quite a bit of time on these at the beginning, but then we had that one long meeting that we just didn't get a chance to really dig into them. So these, you know, they're based very much on what we heard from everyone, but are very, you know, they're important because this is what we based all the other recommendations off of. Haifa, did you have comments from the county on any of these elements?
I send you the word, the documents that they send us. That's all. What I
Okay.
have from them.
Okay. Were most of theirs focused on the implementation, or did they have any on these goals?
No, I don't. I think on the implementation and the
The-
maps. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah. I have the paper here. Yeah, there is nothing on the implementation
Okay.
on the goal. They have one comment, so I'm trying to find it. Okay, I think that's all.
That is okay. All right. How about part 2, the land management plan? And again, this is the one that we spent quite a bit of time on as a group. And so we just tried to translate that work directly into the plan document. Do
I
you all
actually think
feel-
it shows really well, Emily.
okay.
I think it shows really well. I think that this looks, updated and new and fresh with, there's hardly any way you can't understand which area we're talking about and how it's labeled. I appreciate that. And it just seems very familiar to me because we've been talking about it for a while. So I don't have any concerns about this section. I'd be interested to hear if anybody in the committee thinks elsewise.
Has anyone tested it on a spouse or coworker to see if they get it?
Good point.
Compared to my spouse.
And we can do a little bit of that, but if you're feeling like we've clearly translated what we worked on, and you're able to find the information that you would want to be able to find, and I think especially as either the trustees or the zoning commission or your BZA, I mean, being able to find this information is going to be critical when you have a zoning case or a development to review, and also being able to communicate that to the development community.
I think it's very clear. I'd like to hear from my other two trustees on this, but I wouldn't change anything about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really easy to follow. And anyone looking at it could, like you were saying, Emily, could very easily have a good access to it and be able to understand kind of exactly what it was that we've been working on for this time. So I really like it. It's very plain, very clear, and it kind of runs through very easily each one of the different areas that we focused on. So yeah, I appreciate the work that everyone put into this. I think it's great.
Good.
One of the things that I absolutely hated about our last comprehensive plan were how the character areas had the fuzzy borders, which was done deliberately last time because they were supposed to be character areas, but then that got us into some issues when we were trying to make determinations on zoning cases of, well, the corner of this property is in one character area and the corner of that property is in the other character area. So really, like, we can like do this or that with the property, and it kind of got away from the original intent. So I like that we took the time to identify, first of all, the properties that are available for development or redevelopment, most likely in the next 5 to 10 years. And then we specifically looked at those properties specifically and didn't leave it as in open to interpretation of what the steering committee is looking for in the future or not, or what the steering committee was trying to say when we were developing this comprehensive plan, so that when it comes with us, I have a specific property, it's very clear what the steering committee wanted from that. And I really appreciate that. And I think it's clear, and I think it's very well defined which properties fall under which category and which character area and which recommendation. So I really like that.
All right, great. I'm happy we got there.
Took us a while, but I'm happy we got there too.
Yeah, and it's a lot of hard work. I mean, that you all got into the very detailed land use planning. Okay, so the next section after the land use is parks and recreation, and like I said, you all had just undertaken that master plan process right before we got started on this. I think you adopted that about 3 or 4 months into this process, and so you had a great list of things that you were going to accomplish there. And so rather than recreating the wheel, we pulled those forward. So now they're in the comp plan as well. So I don't think, I mean, unless you all have something that you want to try to like emphasize or something here, I mean, these are things that were already approved and adopted with that plan. So I hope this is pretty straightforward. The natural resources, again, this is one that has a lot of carryover from the 2015 plan. And I think we did drop some maps in here. It probably would be helpful to update these, but because we hadn't discussed it, and I think the last time they were blended, like the Parks and Recreation and the open space components got kind of blended together. But
Yeah, I was going to ask on this particular graph here, that area 3.
mhm.
I think if you go and look at the maps we were talking about earlier, we identified as one of those low density
density.
rural areas. So is
Mhm.
that kind of inconsistent to list it as low density rural there and then call out an open space recommendation here, or is that consistent?
I think it's fairly consistent. I think in the 2015 plan, the implication in these areas was if development happened in those areas, there was still a desire to maintain open spaces, and that kind of quasi-rural character. But I think the way that we've adapted or the updates with the park residential zoning and some of the other elements, we have a clearer definition now, perhaps, of open space. So I think they're still relatively consistent. However, there might be a better way to communicate that this time around.
Yeah, I think we should try to clarify, especially that area that Lyle is talking about, and maybe what open space recommendations mean. Just knowing that there's development going in, not far from where that 3 is planted right now, and we're not sure. I know what we're saying. I'm not sure others will know what we're saying with that recommendation. We know that you can't develop too much further back there. You're gonna have a problem and fall into the woods, and the woods are gonna tumble you down to the river, and the river's gonna take you away. I'm just wondering if we need to explore what that recommendation is further. Or do you think that I'm sorry, I just lost my page and I cannot see your screen.
Oh, we're page 118, 119.
You could almost take that map out and just leave it to the definitions you used in the other section. One thing to consider, just so you don't create that confusion, because it seems like you already defined what we wanted for all those different areas, and then you throw this map in here, and it's kind of different. Gives you a different feeling.
I agree with you as well, Lyle. I think it might be best to throw it out. I mean, even when I look at 4, 5, and 6, especially, I think it is a little confusing in the interpretation of open space for those areas. I'm not crazy about it.
I would concur.
Okay.
This might be dumb, but why are we calling Kingswood a recommended park at this point and not like an existing park or a future park?
Are you referencing this map or something we had?
Yeah, like this map specifically says, and then I think it shows up in another point also where there's the same map without the open space recommendations.
Yeah,
and it says future 10 to 20 acre park when that's a bigger parcel of land, first of all, than 20 acres. and it's also currently being used as a park.
Mhm. I think that, well, the map itself was carryover from the 2015 plan, which at that time, it hadn't been fully designated. The use of it was still up in the air.
Yeah, we'll get it updated.
Yeah, I'll say same thing applies with the map on page 115. Again, it says on the bottom, pulled from the 2015 plan. So that would be good to update.
Yeah. So, okay. So this one just needs to be updated with the master plan map. Okay, did anyone see any other maps that had the old parks? That's Parks and Recreation. Lyle, I think you mentioned was it the trail thing that needed updated?
Yeah, it's figure 49 that has the master plan of paths. It was pulled from 2015 as well, and
Yeah.
there's a
Okay.
lot of trails on there that already exist now, so which is great.
Yeah, so we just need to update the status from proposed to existing. Okay. Haifa, do you have anything else on these, whether it was the parks or the mobility and connectivity from the county? While she's looking, did anyone else have any concerns with the mobility and connectivity section?
No,
Yeah,
Emily.
I have some information on that. I think that needs to be updated with projects that have been completed and proposed projects in the pipeline. So I'll
Okay,
work with Sam and Haifa and get that list to you.
okay, that sounds good. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, is figure 48, is that a new concept? I hadn't seen that one before. The two roundabouts on,
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
it's-
one came from the county, didn't it?
The TID.
TID.
yeah, okay, so it is it's a recent thing, not some carryover from 2015.
No,
No.
that's that project.
Yeah,
Okay. So that gets us to the implementation strategy. And again, like I said throughout the presentation, this is the stuff that most of you, this is going to be new, because we haven't presented this before. You haven't seen drafts of this before. And so I'm more than happy to go through this a little bit more in detail. And then if you want to discuss it, or if we need to do some follow-up meeting on these, we certainly can. What would satisfy your curiosity about this?
I have a observation, I guess.
Okay.
My, my first time reading through it, most of the actions I saw seemed to have some relation back to something we had talked about earlier in the plan as either one of the objectives or tying back to one of the areas. The one that stuck out to me that just seemed like it was kind of in here, and I'm having trouble seeing how it ties back to something
Okay.
mentioned earlier in the plan, is under the very last section, on the very last page, under the capital improvements, the second item, the design and build the township administration building and facilities. And I know that's something that's been talked about outside the steering committee and plan. I don't remember discussing it here or see how it ties back to something else. And maybe, so I guess it'd just be a question of helping me understand where it ties back to something else, or does it belong here?
Yeah. So I believe part of that is carry over from a little bit of the previous plan. But it has always been tied to the branding and identity of the township. And, having a place that is, the township administration. So I think that's where it came from. But I think you're correct. Like we never really talked about a place for it, or what its priority was. And I don't know that, I can't recall a very specific recommendation other than, kind of general services and things like that, that might apply there.
So Emily, maybe part of the problem is the messaging, because although it will act as an administration building, it's a community. I'm not sure if we've even discussed how we're going to officially present it, but it's a community building. It's a give back to the public, not only in regards to branding and the township and part of the identity, but part of like staking our claim in our signature park with a building that's easily accessible to the public when they're there and for the events that we hold at the park. We have the new pavilion there right now. This won't be far from that. So it's kind of an extension of that park, and that being our signature park that we talk about in the Parks Master Plan. So I think the name of it is probably off for the plan. And if Eric wanted to jump in here and discuss that a little bit more, I think that might be, and I'm not speaking for you, Lyle, that might be where some of the confusion is and where it fits in.
No, and I think that would make it fit in better with the theme of the plan too, if you brought some of those elements out. It's not just that we're building a new township building, it's
Right.
more than that, and it does tie back into a couple of these items. So I was just looking for a way to do that. So
Yeah,
No,
I
I'm
think,
over bringing that up.
I think calling it, township administration building and facilities is pretty bland, when the reality is, the building is going to act as more of a civic building with a number of public spaces for use by the public. We've started to reference it in our preliminary drawings as Deerfield Township civic facility. And, we can talk internally about how to label some of those future public spaces within that facility so that they align better with the plan here.
Okay. The other thing that we didn't do it here, but we certainly can. A lot of times with these implementation recommendations, we will put with them, what kind of action well, I guess that's how we've organized them here, is by the type of action. But we could also put in kind of parentheses at the end of each of these, like what organization, agency, department is responsible for leading this, and then any partners that might need to be there. If you all think that would be helpful to have in the document. I believe most of them are written from the perspective that the township would do it, but we aren't explicit with the department responsibilities.
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned, in my opinion, with the department responsibilities. I think that's for us to figure out and delegate which department and how those get sorted. When I look under the administrative and organizational item, we only have the one bullet point there, and I have a couple notes that I've taken, and I'll work on crafting something. But I think there's also a need to put in a bullet point or a couple more bullet points that talk about ensuring that our public services are being evaluated for efficiencies as well. So not only providing exceptional service, but in the most efficient manner that we possibly can. And then, some type of highlight on the financial ramifications that are associated with those efficiencies. I think it's just good to start off with that from an administrative perspective. So
Yeah.
I would shoot you a bullet point on that. I had a question under plan, studies, and strategies. I guess it would be the third bullet point. It talks about collaborate on preparations and adequate public facilities manual. What is that? What are you referencing in terms of a public facilities manual?
So I know, and I think a little bit of this carried forward from the previous plan, I believe. But this is also something we've done in other communities, in that because the township doesn't have direct control over the schools or the roads, that what you can do is include an understanding, because you can't just say, well, we can't permit that development because there isn't capacity in this road network or whatever. But if you had an agreement or an understanding with the schools about how they are estimating their capacity, how they're dealing with their enrollment, or how the county is planning for that road improvement and things like that, where it was kind of laid out that, when we hit these different thresholds, that's what is kind of requiring improvements to our public facilities. And instead of using it as a regulatory tool, it's more like a manual that everyone can reference to understand, when are those triggers going to happen?
Yeah, I guess I understand it. I'm a little concerned if we're taking the lead on trying to take the school's information, in terms of what they feel is appropriate for their thresholds, or we're trying to tell the county, what their capstone is or tipping point for roadway improvements. Obviously, they have their infrastructure plans. Again, just my opinion, I'll defer to the group and the trustees. I'm not a big fan of us being, the holder of this public facilities manual. I think that, there is a significant amount of collaboration that takes place amongst all those entities, but I think it's a very arduous task in order to compile something of that magnitude.
I would agree. I think that's perfectly said. And each individual case that we've had, I've dealt with the county individually on those circumstances, or the school district that's, the growth might affect. So it's been 3 years of different circumstances across the board on improvements that could be made, traffic studies that can be done. And what I've learned is there's just no one set that can trigger something happening or not happening, especially in the township, and especially considering that we rely on the county's roads and their traffic counts and their plans to continue to pull us through as we grow.
So generally speaking, then, are we all supporting the idea of deleting that?
I support the idea of deleting that.
I also support it, but I would like to hear from some of the members of the steering committee here, maybe some of the ones who haven't spoken up yet. Just because this is something, we're coming at it from the trustees side here saying, we get a lot of like requests and where we say we can't approve this or that because of the traffic or the schools. And we can't do it because we don't have a document like this, but it's something that we hear from the community that they kind of want us to take that into consideration. And before we completely take it off the table, I would like to hear from some of the other members of the steering committee about, what they think about if it's something that we should even like consider at this point, or should we let the schools manage their growth, let the county manage, their own trigger points and their funding and when they can do road improvements, and then we manage the zoning how it's been traditionally done.
Sounds like everyone is neutral.
So it's really hard to be neutral on this, Emily, because we don't, no matter what, we could have this plan and it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything because there's a procedure in place that the county rolls through before a new development comes online, starting at regional county planning commission, where water and sewer is represented, the engineers are represented or whatever. So these kind of questions are out of our hands. It's have with the developer directly in regards to working on density to control traffic flow and control situations in the schools. And I think this board has done a great job of that. We said no to 200 additional homes and got it down to under 100 in certain stances. And it took a year to get it done. But we do have ways of controlling it without stepping on the county's feet or their process. So I would like to see that removed, knowing that we will always have the township's best interest at heart. And I believe firmly we should continue to take each case by case.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, Lil, I agree with you. Exactly what you said. The processes and stuff that are in place and everything. So I agree with taking it out.
Yeah, I think that was well put.
Okay. All right. Are there any other implementation recommendations that you all would like to see
Emily,
either
I-
enhanced?
So I just have a quick question on it. You've got when you start this section, you've got it listed out of, defining what would be like a low priority, medium priority, high priority, and then the timeline for when, or short-term, midterm, long-term. But then I don't see later where we actually have this is a short-term priority, this is a long-term priority.
Right.
With this follow-up action. So it kind of seems like there should be more in there.
Yes, you are correct. And that probably what I was thinking in not doing that was that we probably needed to work on that collectively and not have me decide that for you. But I can certainly take a shot at it if you'd like me to circulate this with some priorities on there. And then ultimately what we would usually do is create like a chart that would show how these things play out over time, so that it's a little bit, kind of that one page, here are the things we're going to do in the short term, long term, to give you a little bit of a one-stop reference for those. I mean, we only have about 10 minutes left, so that's something that I would be happy to take a shot at it and send it around to everyone. And then if you want to, we could do either a follow-up meeting, or if you just want to send us your comments back, and we can make any revisions before we start working on the public review draft. And then we can continue to kind of refine the order as it goes through the public review process. That's also a good option to help keep us moving. So really, it's up to you all how you'd like to proceed with that.
I think I'd like you to try, if you could, take a stab at it, and then we can offer feedback. So I think that's going to be the most expedient way of getting this done.
Mhm. All right. What do you all think about the idea of just sending it around to you so you can see it? And then if you have any critical concerns about it before we send it out to the public, we can adjust it. But otherwise, we could kind of let it go through the public process in terms of, it's still tinkering with those priorities.
I'm okay with that.
Hey, Emily, I would say maybe circle back with Eric on these, as the Board of Trustees does have a, capital improvement plan in place already. We have the CIC in place already in regards to what we're looking at, where we've talked exclusively and extensively with this group about redevelopment opportunities. I would just like to make sure that since you're not out there, floating that flag by yourself, that you circle back with Eric and he can give you some direction on where the board's been on this.
Definitely. Okay.
Emily, I have just one or two more quick ones before we hop
Sure.
off. Under the initiative and program, there's reference made to property maintenance programs. That's something we have been considering. Obviously, very labor intensive and very costly, but I do foresee that's something that the township may move towards in over the next couple of years. So I think we should call that property maintenance program or code out as a bullet point. And then the last bullet you have there, consider adding arts and culture function to the Parks and Rec staff. I do not foresee us adding that function to the staff. That's more of a current collaboration through the Arts Alliance with Meredith Raffle. Adding that to events and programs, I think, is appropriate, but I don't foresee us adding that to permanent staff in that line. And we should make reference to the Arts Alliance under partners and collaborations. And I have a few others there that I can email back as well.
Okay. And then I'm assuming too, Eric, you've got some on the capital improvements that we can talk about.
Yes, ma'am. Sure do.
Okay. All right. Well, since Eric, did you have anything else or? Okay. All right. So I guess since we did a great job tonight, everyone, thank you. So question for you, we didn't have a whole lot of changes, a handful here that you can see. So my question is are you all comfortable with the idea of us making these edits, circling back with Eric, preparing a second draft for you so you can see where we changed the things that we talked about tonight? So basically give you a red line of this. And then in lieu of another meeting, if you could just give us your blessing via email or give us a call and let us know that you're okay with those changes, then we can start moving towards preparing the formatted and designed document for public review. Anyone object to that approach?
Julie, I think that's a great idea. And I would say that maybe that's the follow-up meeting is once we have the draft and, put together for the general public, that we come back and meet with the group just so that they get the second look before it goes live. Does that work for everybody or? Okay.
That works for me.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Sam. Thanks.
All right. And again, I think we're still gonna be as nimble as we can with the public review process because, you know, we'd like to get it started as soon as possible, but given circumstances with social distancing, et cetera, we want to make sure that people have the opportunities to do this and engage with us as they need to. So Brian and I will continue working with Sam and Haifa to make sure that we get a strategy together that'll make that work for everyone. And you know, we'll follow your lead, but we do want to try to get that done as soon as possible. All right.
So
Well,
Emily, I just wanted to, if you don't mind, just one more thing, because it sounds like we're wrapping up. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. I know some people aren't comfortable talking on Zoom. I can't blame you. It can be a little bit awkward talking over everybody, especially if you're Jim Siciliano. I mean, he loves to, yeah. I mean, it's hard to get a word in edgewise with Jim on Zoom, but what are you going to do?
I spend my life now teaching on Zoom, so.
Right? So, you know, on behalf of the Board of Trustees and President Malhotra, we just want to thank everybody for being here and participating and walking through this process. And Emily, thanks for throwing this together for us.
very welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here and for taking the time to read this really long, kind of dry document and coming prepared with notes and spending your Tuesday night with us. And thank you for spending your last like year and a half now with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Here's the awkward end of the call, Emily. We'll throw it back to you.
That's right. Yeah, I'm just going to stop recording it and end it